Welcome to Hood Champion Boxing and Sports. In boxing, you find a way to win, or you find a way to lose. Now, let me tell you something, and this is probably going to stir the pot a little bit, but in my opinion, and I'm being serious now, I just think Canelo Alvarez, now this is the problem, right, before I even start talking. Canelo Alvarez went on record in an interview and said that he is still the pound for pound king in boxing. He does not feel that anybody has taken his position. Now, I would argue that the preponderance of boxing fans, as of right now, rank Terence Crawford number one pound for pound and rank Canelo number two. Now, when it comes to the face of boxing, I would also say that many would argue that Gervonta Davis is the face of boxing and Canelo is number two. Now, I'm going to say this. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I can understand the argument and I can see how someone would be comfortable getting into a back and forth, ensuring that their point of views about Gervonta Davis being the face of boxing are tenable, because there's data out there to show that Gervonta Davis is a face of boxing, the face of boxing. I think the verdict's still out on that. But as far as Terence Crawford and being the pound for pound king, which I think he is, and many others also feel that way, and I think at this point in time, Canelo Alvarez doesn't have a leg to stand on. When you look at what Terence Crawford was able to do against Earl Spence, I mean, the one-sided destruction of arguably what many felt at the time was someone else who was way up on the pound for pound rank in the pound for pound rankings. And again, some would argue that Earl Spence was the pound for pound best at that moment. However, to settle all this, I really think that Canelo Alvarez must get in there and fight Terence Crawford if being recognized as the pound for pound best boxer in the world is that important to him. Now, the issue with Canelo Alvarez is you can't come and expect to hold that position as the number one on the pound for pound rankings, right? Which is subjective anyway, but again, there's an argument there for Canelo with his resume to say that he is the guy. But when you look at him pulling a guy up two weight divisions and fighting him and dominating him, right? But then coming at the end of the fight and puffing up his chest and saying how he's back, there's no one who can beat him. He's this Canelo is basically unbeatable. That's not the same as that victory isn't the same as when Terence Crawford defeated Earl Spence. When you defeat a guy like Earl Spence the way Crawford did, that's when you get up in front of the microphone and cameras and puff out your chest and you start to talk about how you're unbeatable. This version of yourself it can't be dethroned. Not when you bring somebody up two weight divisions. Essentially, that would be like Crawford bringing Gervonta Davis up two weight divisions and spanking him, and then puffing up his chest and saying how he's unbeatable. Now, Crawford going up or Canelo going up and fighting a guy like Bivol, which I think was just horrible matchmaking before. You got to remember, Bivol's a gold medalist, accomplished amateur, and was just taller and longer and just had that style and the experience to give anyone problems. But when you beat a guy like Bivol, that's where you puff out your chest and you start to say how this version of yourself is unbeatable. Not when you struggle with stiff competition and then come back to fight lower threat, a fighter who presents a lower threat from a lower weight class, although they're a great fighter in their weight class, but to know you have all the advantage. That's just not how that works. And as a result, many fans have kind of, scoffed at the idea of Canelo feeling that he still deserves to be held, be recognized as the pound for pound king of boxing. That's not the case. So you say, okay, well, if he has to fight Terence Crawford, how do we get there? There's a huge weight disparity. You're talking about 147 pounds to 168 pounds. Well, the bottom line is this. There's got to be some kind of compromise. I think 100% that Canelo Alvarez gets full credit, which would be deserved, if he was willing to come down to 168 pounds and for Terence Crawford to meet him there at 160. I think the fight is, I would say, fair. However, I'd have to be honest with you. I think it still favors Canelo at 160 opposed to Terence Crawford, because you're still talking about coming up two weight classes, which essentially is what Jamal Charlo did, going to fight Canelo at 168. But this is the difference. Canelo is now cutting down to a weight that he does not want to make. So it kind of balances things out. But again, you still got to look and say, okay, you got a guy coming up two weight divisions. But I think it's fair to take into consideration and to highlight that Canelo will be coming down, 8 pounds, which is huge, especially for someone who hasn't had to do that in years. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot in order to make a Terence Crawford-Canelo Alvarez fight. And that's kind of the sweet spot as well to ensure that if Canelo gets the victory, he'll get full credit, and then he will again become the pound-for-pound king by defeating Terence Crawford. Conversely, if Terence Crawford bubbles up to 160, and Canelo comes down to 168, I don't think there'll be an argument if Crawford beats Canelo at 160 that he weight drained him, that he had all the advantage going into that fight. I think Crawford will get full credit for a win over Canelo Alvarez at 160 pounds. I really do. And so I think that's a win-win for Crawford. I think it could be a win-win for Canelo, and I think it'd be a win-win for the fans. The problem I see is if for some reason they were to even try to make a fight, which I know it would not happen, between Crawford and Canelo at 154. Like, that's just somewhere that Canelo hasn't been in years. He's not trying to go. He's outgrown it. And I think that would be a case of Crawford, if we're just having a conversation now, if Crawford and Canelo were to make a fight at 154 and Crawford beat him, I don't think Crawford would get any credit for that win, because basically they'd be saying that he weight drained Canelo. Very similarly to how they're saying that Earl Spence was weight drained at 147. So, coming full circle to the conversation, I truly believe for Canelo Alvarez, if he wants to run around here and believe that he's still the pound-for-pound king, I just can't accept that is truly what he feels inside. I think that's just something that he says, but he doesn't believe. Canelo's a smart guy. He's been around boxing for a while. He knows what it takes. He knows the kind of wins that it takes to be recognized as a pound-for-pound king. And I think he can sit back and look at the body of work of Terence Crawford, especially with this recent win over Earl Spence, and it'd be hard for him to argue that he is still the guy. Now, if we want to peel it back even further, start talking about pay-per-view sales, popularity, fight purses, but then there's no one who can compete with Canelo Alvarez. But as far as, I would say, body of work in the ring, I'd have to say right now Terence Crawford is the guy. And just as a result of who he's fought, especially the Sean Porter win, and this Earl Spence win, I just think that carries a lot more weight than some of the victories of Canelo Alvarez. Remember, when Canelo Alvarez was bubbling up weight divisions and fighting the Rocky Fieldings and going up and fighting the Sergey Kovalevs and and all the other work that he was doing. I mean, we got to give him credit for those wins, but none of those guys were the equivalent of an Earl Spence. Bivol was probably the closest thing that was the equivalent of him facing like Crawford facing an Earl Spence, for Canelo facing something kind of like an Earl Spence. And you saw what happened there. He fell not just short. He failed the test and came up way short of getting anywhere close to a victory, although the judges and the secret society were definitely involved. So that being said, in my opinion, Canelo Alvarez, if he wants to be seen as a pound-for-pound king again, I just think he has to fight Terence Crawford. I do. And I would have to say at 160, I'd have to favor Canelo. But I'm not a guy who bets. And if I was, I would not bet against Terence Crawford, although I think Canelo should be the favorite. I would not bet against Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford has been proven since the HBO days. If he gets in the ring with an opponent, he's going to find a way to win. And with just his natural makeup and his mentality, it's going to be hard for anyone to beat him because Terence Crawford is going to fight you. And he's not just going to cower out the ring. He's just one of those guys who was just born to be a fighter. And so is Canelo. So when you bring the two of them together, you get it's like a chemical combustion. You're going to get a fireworks in the ring, you know. So that being said, Crawford, Canelo, I just think that fight, as every day goes by, becomes more and more meaningful. And especially with everything that's going on now, I just think for Canelo, where does he go? For Crawford, where does he go? I think the two of them need each other more than ever right now. But we'll have to wait and see what the key decision makers and the guys behind the scenes want to do with both of their careers. But in my opinion, Canelo Alvarez must defeat Terence Crawford to become the pound-for-pound king again. And I just don't think fighting guys who are, bringing guys up to 168 is the answer. I think if you're going to fight a guy like Crawford, which he should, I should be at 160, because now you're talking about a more level playing field. And again, I would have to favor Canelo in that, but I would not bet against Crawford because there's just something about Crawford. No matter what happens in the ring, he finds a way to win. And once he gets into gear, it's all downhill for whoever he's facing. That being said, y'all keep cool. Shout out to the veterans, all 7 continents. I'm in the breeze.